I'm going to get something off my chest here. I've got a love-hate relationship with a certain brand. It's a brand that I've been aware of for many, many years. It's a brand that you are aware of, but I've developed a very strong love-hate relationship with this brand. And the brand that I'm talking about is IKEA. I love their products. I love the fact that you can get like crazy good deals and cool furniture. I hate putting their products together. I despise it. And this week I had to put together an IKEA shelf. And I've had this experience every time I put together an IKEA product. It was there was the box. I opened up the box and I just felt demoralized. Because you see this box, and I don't know how IKEA does it, but there's a box like this size, an entire living room set is in this tiny box. I opened up the box, and someone's like, hey, I have some shelves I need you to put together. And so I just looked at it, and I thought to myself, I'm a smart man. I've married a great wife. I've got 4 kids. I've made it this far in life, and it just brought me to my knees because, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I was with a bunch of people, and I was the pastor, and I just didn't want to be the idiot pastor, but I was like, okay. So I look at it, and it's like all of these just like random pieces of wood, and then there was a box of bolts and screws and wooden pegs, and the only thing it was missing was a flux capacitor. And we could have gone back in time, and I was like, what are we doing? And so I just sat there for a minute and just looked at it and going, man, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then, I don't know if you know this, but IKEA does something brilliant. Beginning to dig through, and at the bottom, there's this little white pamphlet, and on the front it said instructions. And I looked at it, and on the front of this little white book was the picture of what the shelf should look like if you happen to complete it correctly. And I opened it up, and there were steps. Now, I think there are like 484 steps to this thing, but they had steps lined out. Step 1, 2, 3, 4 in this shelf. And here's what it's supposed to look like, and here's how you accomplish it. If you're in the education world, that is known as scope and sequence. Scope and sequence. Education world, hey, here's the whole scope of what we're trying to teach them, and here's the sequence of how that's going to work. You may know it better in the construction world as blueprints and construction schedule. Blueprints are like, hey, here's the project we're trying to build. Construction schedule, here's the order and way it's going to happen. Scope and sequence. And you need to understand that life has a scope and sequence. Because if you don't realize that, then you just look at your life as a bunch of random parts and objects. It's a bunch of random relationships and events and jobs and vacations and friends, and it's just a bunch of random things. And if that's the case in your mind, then there is no meaning and there is no purpose, and you just kind of wander aimlessly through life. But if you could understand that God has created and designed a very specific scope and sequence to your life, that there isn't just a bunch of random relationships and jobs and schools and education, that there is a very specific scope and a very specific sequence. If that could move from the head to the heart today, then I believe you would find great meaning and great purpose in life, knowing that it's not a series of random events, that God has designed a scope and a sequence for your life. If you got a Bible, grab it. Go to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. They're going to put up on the screens. We started this series last week called Meaningless, and we're walking through Ecclesiastes, which was written by King Solomon. Solomon was King David's son. David and Goliath, one of his sons was Solomon. Solomon at this time is the wealthiest, most powerful king in the whole world. Literally anything he wanted, he did, he tried, he could take. And there was nothing outside of his grasp or authority or rule. And so he literally tries every area and facet of life that you can imagine. And Ecclesiastes is more than likely written near the end of his life. And you see he makes some conclusions about life, things that he's explored, things that he's found both meaning in and both lack of meaning in. And Ecclesiastes chapter 3 is an interesting chapter because he describes the scope and sequence that God has intended and ordained for life. Now, in 1965, there was a band called The Byrds. They wrote a song called Turn, Turn, Turn. 30 years later, it was reintroduced to my generation through a movie soundtrack called Forrest Gump. But 3,000 years before life was like a box of chocolates, like 3,000 years before that, the lyrics in that song, Turn, 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 were written 3,000 years earlier by King Solomon as he describes the scope and sequence of life. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1, here's what he writes. He says, "For everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down, a time to build up, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to turn away, a time to search and a time to quit searching, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be quiet and a time to speak, a time for love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace." And so Solomon goes through some major areas and seasons of life. And you'll notice on both extremes, he covers both positive and negative, but he rolls through the ups and downs, the highs and lows, the seasons of life. He goes, everything has a season in life. This is the way life works and life operates. Through the years, through the decades, through the centuries, through the generations, there are seasons of good times and bad times, and good times and bad times. Now, moving to Georgia, we moved here 4 years ago. Brianna and I love so many things about Georgia, but one of the top things that we love about living where we live is we get to experience 4 full seasons living here. Now, being from South Texas, there are 2 seasons, hot and not as hot. That's it. And so out of spite, I will screen share the weather here and send it to my buddies back in Texas. It's like, hey, it gets down into the 60s at night. They send things back that I won't share here in church, but we're buddies. It's all in fun. But here's what I like, because in Texas, it literally was hot and not as hot. But here, man, you get an actual summer, and then fall, and then winter, and then spring, and then it kind of rolls through it. Now, this is just me, and you might be way more spiritual than I am, but man, about this time, I'm kind of over the heat. It was fun, but I'm ready for the weather to cool off. And here in a few weeks, man, it's gonna cool off, and we'll go fall, and then again winter. And right about January, February, I'm kind of over the cool. Like I wanted to warm back up again. And so God has just created these seasons and these ebbs and flows in life. This is the way life works and life operates. Now, this is my own personal opinion, so you can disagree with me later if you want to. But in my opinion, I think social media has diluted the seasons of life. I think depending on which social media stream you watch, it's either nothing but amazing highs or nothing but extreme lows. And it's either extreme. So whatever social media stream you follow is like, this is the worst day since yesterday, and that was the worst day since the day before. And you're going, I get you having a bad day, but man, there are some ups and downs. But then on the flip side, and you follow these people, like every day is the greatest day ever. Like, oh my goodness, this is the greatest day since yesterday. You're going, it's Tuesday, for crying out loud. Just shut up. Not that great of a day. But you see it. Because it's either all great or all bad and nothing in between. But someone goes, no. There are seasons and ebbs and flows and highs and lows. Like this is the way life works. But the unfortunate thing is seasons don't make great social media posts. It's just ups and downs and highs and lows. But Solomon goes, this is how life works. But here's something really cool. Look what he says, verse 9. He says, what do people really get for all their hard work? I've seen the burden God has placed on us all. Yet, God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. He goes, listen, there are seasons and ebbs and flows in life, and God, who's made everything beautiful for its own time, he goes, he's planted eternity in the human heart, but you and I, we cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. So let me frame it for you this way. If you want to know what the scope and sequence of life is for you, the secret is this, is that the scope of life is eternal and the sequence of life is seasonal. The scope of your life is eternal and the sequence of your life, how it flows, how it rolls, is seasonal. And this is what Solomon is writing. Listen, God has created this grandiose scope, bigger than your life here on this earth, and he's created and ordained it for seasons to flow. And all of these things fit together beautifully in its own time when it's God ordained. The scope of your life is eternal, and the sequence of your life is seasonal. So let's talk about those two things for a couple of minutes. The scope. See, when we think about our life, we get in the middle of whatever it is, work, school, relationships, marriage, and we revolve our life around the 70, 80, 90, maybe 100 years on this earth that we have. And it is so important. This is what matters. And Solomon reminds us, going, listen, it's bigger than your time here on this earth. It is eternal. And what you do today matters not only today, but matters for eternity. And if you've been in church before, you've heard the word eternity and then the idea of your life together, certainly from a preacher. Eternity matters. And eternity is one of those words where you're going, yeah, I know it's out there, but I've got my own problems too. And so I want to give you a visual illustration to demonstrate your life compared to eternity. So I brought a picture. Go ahead and put that picture up there. It's a picture I found this week. Now, it's a pretty picture. Let me tell you what that is not a picture of. That is not a picture of planets. It's not a picture of just stars. That is a picture taken by the Hubble telescope. It took 9 years of orbiting to take that picture. What you're looking at is at least 10,000 galaxies in that one picture. 10,000 galaxies. If it's been a minute since you've been in science class, we live in the Milky Way galaxy. So this is not the Milky Way. This is not a solar system. 10,000 galaxies. Think of that as eternity. And then think of this little pebble right here as your life. And I want you to compare those two. Go ahead and put that picture back up there, right there. This is you, and that's eternity. Howdy, right there, that's eternity right there. This is your life. 70, 80, 90 years, your 401k, your savings account, your retirement plan, HOA president you're dealing with, the football game you want to go. This is your life. All these things that really weigh you down, you pour a whole lot of time into, they are important. But in the grand scheme of eternity, it pales in comparison. This is why Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow, for today has enough troubles of its own. Because we worry about this, and God goes, I get it, that's important, but in the grand scheme of things, it is an eternal thing, which is both an interesting and a bit of a scary concept. Because you realize, okay, now my life is bigger than 70, 80, 90 years on this earth. So you need to understand that what you do matters not only today, but for eternity. There's a verse in Romans that says, each of us, you and I, will hold a personal account before God. Not a group account, not a church account. It's not Chris and Mountain Lake and we're all in this together, God. It's one-on-one, a personal account for what you did today that matters for eternity. So the conversations you have, the kids that you're raising, the job that you're at, the attitude that you carry, the thoughts that are in your mind, the way you treat your friends, the way you treat your husband, your wife, the way you treat human beings, it matters not only today, not only tomorrow, but for eternity. So what you do matters. And so I get sometimes you're looking at your life, it feels like a box of random parts put together, but the scope is eternal. And so zoom out a little bit and go, man, this conversation I'm about to have, this email that I'm about to send, this text message that I'm about to send in frustration, it matters not only today, but for eternity, because my life is not just the 70, 80, 90 years on this earth. It is eternal. Scope is eternity, and then the sequence of your life is seasonal. It's seasonal. And I want you to go back, and I want you to look at verse 11. It says, God has made everything beautiful for its own time. Your life is made up of seasons. Some good, some bad, some everywhere in between. But there's this ebb and flow in life, and all of them are beautiful in God's timing. See, we read the good seasons in verses 1 through 9. Time to be born, time to reap, time to harvest. The good stuff, we go, oh yeah, that's beautiful. They are, but the flip side is true as well. The stuff that you go through, the stuff that you walk through, the confusing things, the painful things, the loss, the death, the sickness, those things God forges you and forms you, and all of it is beautiful in His timing and in His sequence. And so you open up the box of your life, it feels like a bunch of random parts and things, but there's an order and a sequence that God in His timing is writing in your life. And so I get it's painful, and I get it's frustrating and confusing or whatever it is. But if you would understand that your life, the scope of your life is eternal, and that the God of the universe who holds everything together is writing something beautiful in His timing and His way, and the season that you're walking through is a part of the sequence that's a part of His beautiful plan. Let me illustrate it this way. I want you to go ahead and put that musical note up there on the screen. All right. I was told this morning that note is the A. Can somebody confirm that? Yes. Yes. Okay, good. If Sean bails in the last song, you guys come lead worship, all right? Cool. So that's an A. It's nice. It's rather boring. And sometimes in life, it feels like all we are playing is the note A over and over and over again. But if you zoom out a little bit further from that, you'll see, well, there's a couple of more notes. And so now you play those two notes together. But again, it just doesn't feel great. And then if you zoom out a little bit further, well, now you got some chords and some notes that you're playing together. So now it's no longer just the A. Now it's a few more notes. But again, it still feels a little pointless, a little meaningless. Then you zoom out a little further, and oh, well, wait a minute, there's some notes that are running together and ups and downs and chords. Now it makes a little bit more sense, but still it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Then you zoom out even further and you realize that all of those notes that seem pointless were a part of one of the most famous piano pieces ever written by one of the most famous composers who ever lived. But all we see is the note A, and it's played over and over again, but then you realize, oh, it's a part of a beautiful masterpiece. In which I was told this morning, you can go ahead, put that back up there. I was told this morning, and if you're a music person, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I was told this morning that it tells you exactly how to play the song, meaning it's not just the note A, but it's the dynamics of the song. It's fast, it's slow, it's loud, it's quiet. And so now it's not just I'm hitting the note A. There is a way in which you're supposed to play it, in which the original composer wants you to play it. The person who wrote the brilliant masterpiece goes, there's a way I want you to play this. And there's some feeling and there's some dynamics in it, but we go, I'm just hitting the letter A over and over and over again. And the composer goes, no. There's a bigger masterpiece at play. And this is what Solomon is saying. Through the seasons, ups and downs and highs and lows, and he goes, everything is beautiful in its own time. The scope of your life is eternal. The sequence of your life is seasonal. Now, what I want you to understand is just, I don't know what box of pieces that you're looking at, but it's easy to get in this idea of going, what is the point of this? The point is that God has a scope and sequence for your life. And God's scope for your life is bigger than you think, and His sequence is more beautiful than you know. God's scope for your life, like what you do matters and is so important. And I realized that if you're raising kids and you're changing dirty diapers and you're in this season going, man, what is the point? There's a massive point that's bigger than that. It's a scope so big that you can't see. And it's a sequence so beautiful that you don't even know what you're doing, but it's a part of God's masterpiece that he's writing in your life. And if you would just understand and trust that God's scope and sequence in your life is his plan and his purpose, then you understand it brings meaning to the season that you're walking through. The good season, the bad season, when you understand God's scope and purpose for your life, it begins to bring meaning. And you're not just looking at a box of random pieces going, I'm not sure what's the point. It seems like a bunch of relationships and jobs and vacations, and what's the point? The point is that there is a scope and a sequence that is divinely ordained for you. And your life and what you're doing matters in the grand scheme of things. Earlier this week on Tuesday, Maria and I celebrated 14 years of marriage, and we did what, when you've been married 14 years, we put the kids to bed and had a steak at our kitchen table. That was our date night, and we had a great time. We talked to reminisce about 14 years, and when you celebrate those type of things, you just look back and you see things and God's hand in it all. And it reminded me of a couple of pictures. I want to put those pictures up there and show you these two pictures. One on the left is obviously the day we got married. The one on the right, it's one of the more recent ones, probably within the past year. But the one on the left, it was tuxedo, wedding dress, paid photographer. The one on the right, it was the end of a long day of yard work. We were hot and sweaty, and that was done with an iPhone. And honestly, the one on the right has more meaning to me than the one on the left. Because the one on the left, man, that couple, all they think life is like unicorns and roses, honestly. Really the only thing about the honeymoon. That's the only thing on their mind. The couple on the right goes, oh, life is painful. Life throws curveballs. Life is not just roses. Sometimes it has thorns. Sometimes there are valleys you have to walk through. And so the couple on the right is 14 years later, 4 kids later, 7 houses later, a career move, a move across the country, 1 dog, and a herd of ducks later. And I was reminded, and bees, and we got bees. Somebody told me we had bees this morning. I was like, man, I share way too much with y'all. But it's that season going, oh, what we thought and how life would go, and it did not. And there's a lot of highs and lows and ups and downs, but 14 years later, man, I'm just here to tell you from personal experience, that if you would understand that God's scope for your life is bigger than this, and you would faithfully walk in obedience through the seasons of ups and downs and highs and lows, then you'll find great meaning and purpose and fulfillment in life. Then when you look at the box of random pieces in your life going, man, I've got relationships and friends and jobs and careers, you realize, oh, that there is a scope and a sequence. It is divinely appointed. The scope is bigger than this. The sequence is seasonal. And if you'd walk in his ways, you'll find more meaning and purpose than you could ever imagine. And so what do you do with all of this? I would encourage you to do 2 things. First thing I'd encourage you to do is to view life with an eternal perspective. View life with an eternal perspective. I get that you're living in this world right here. I get it. Man, this world is super important. The retirement, the 401ks, the colleges, the careers, the groceries. I mean, I get all of that stuff is super important. But there's an eternal perspective that you and I, as followers of Jesus, need to have going, oh, what I do matters. It matters not only here, but it matters for eternity. So the way I treat people, the things that I think about, the things that I say, matter not only today and tomorrow, but for eternity. So view your life with an eternal perspective. And the second thing I would encourage you to do is to walk through the seasons with faithful obedience. Walk through the seasons with faithful obedience. And I get that right now you feel like all you're doing is just playing that one note on the piano. and maybe two notes, and it just doesn't seem to make sense. But if you'd faithfully obey what the composer has written out, then all of a sudden you begin to play it, and it's ups and downs and highs and lows, and you look back and go, oh, there is a beautiful masterpiece that God is writing in your life and in mine. And I may only see the one note. I may only see the one chord. But over time and over the years of faithful obedience and doing what God has called us to do in our life, he's writing a beautiful masterpiece where everything is beautiful for his time. And so I don't know what season you're in. Maybe you're in a season of great prosperity and things are wonderful, or maybe you're in a season of frustrating, loss, confusion. Whatever season you're in, it doesn't matter. Just ask the question, what's the next step of obedience that I need to take? Lord, this is the season that I'm in, good or bad. And I know it's a season, but Lord, what is the very next step of obedience that I need to take? And Lord, I'm going to faithfully obey you, trusting that you're writing something beautiful in my life. I'll finish with this, and it's a great reminder of just how big and great our God is. And it's out of Romans chapter 11. And the Apostle Paul wrote Romans. In Romans chapter 11, verse 33, he's finishing up this chapter, and you almost get a sense of his voice when he writes. And just listen to verse 33. Paul writes, "Oh, how great are God's riches and wisdom and knowledge! How impossible is it for us to understand his decisions and his ways? For who can know the Lord's thoughts? Who knows enough to give him advice? And who has given him so much that he needs to pay it back? For everything comes from him and exists by his power and is intended for his glory. All glory to him forever. Amen." Everything comes from him and exists for his glory. Oh, how great his knowledge and wisdom. It is impossible for me, it's impossible for you to fully understand his ways, to fully grasp the scope of eternity. But we trust the one who holds eternity in his hands and who's writing the seasons of our life, and know that his scope and his sequence is divinely appointed for us. We walk in obedience and find meaning and purpose like we've never found before. Let me pray for us. With every head bowed and every eye closed, for those of you that do know Jesus, you've trusted him as your Savior, you're in some sort of season, good, bad, somewhere in between. There's a specific reason and a purpose for that. And so I would just simply ask the Lord, what is the next step of obedience you want me to take, Lord? Give me the wisdom to know what it is and the courage to obey you. And while they're praying, if you're here, maybe you're watching online, you've never trusted in Jesus. And so I mentioned the word eternity, it rattles around in your mind. Because all you know about is the 70, 80, 90 years on this earth, and then you're not quite sure what happens afterwards. I just want to tell you, as your friend and someone who cares deeply for you, that step number one is placing your faith in Jesus. Bible teaches, says, all have sinned and fallen short of God's glorious standard. Meaning, you and I sinned, and eternity for us was spent in hell away from God forever. That was the plan. But God in his love for you and for me made a way so that you and I can spend eternity in heaven with him. The way he did that was he sent his son Jesus to the earth, lived a perfect life, died on the cross, was buried, came back to the grave. And all you and I have to do is place our faith in Jesus. And the eternity for our souls will be forever in heaven. If you've never done that, that is the good news about Jesus Christ. He accepts you exactly where you're at and walks forward with you in a new life with him. If you've never trusted in Jesus, you want to do that, you want to secure eternity for your soul, say something like this, mean it from the depths of your heart. Just say, today, Jesus, I trust you. I ask your forgiveness for all my sins. Jesus, I believe you went to the cross, you died, were buried, and came back to life. And I'm placing my faith in you for my salvation. Fill me with your Spirit. Teach me from your word. And Jesus, help me to walk in faithful obedience with you from this day forward. Father, I pray for all of us. It's easy to look at our lives and it feels like it's a box of random pieces. God, my prayer is that today you'd move from our mind to our heart and you'd drive home that there is a scope bigger than we know and there's a sequence more beautiful than we can possibly understand. We'd walk in faithful obedience to you. We love you, Jesus, and ask these things in your name. Amen.